ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to the MMA Archive. It's a pleasure to be here once again with the guy, the Lord himself, Erik Bets Fights. Thank you so much for coming on again. Really looking forward to getting into this one. But before we start, please make sure you give them your handle so they know where to find all your content at.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on again, Christopher. I appreciate it. I'm Erik Bets Fights. You can find me at Erik Bets Fights on Twitter, Erik Bets Fights on YouTube, and Erik_Bets_Fights on Instagram. I decided I'm an old guy, but I figured I better start doing Instagram. I'm not using it too much yet, but I'll get it figured out.
Yes, sir. As Trinidad James once said back in the day, on Instagram, straight flexing. Let's get this money. You can find me on Instagram at @ChrisNegrong_, as well as on Twitter at Negrong MMA. Finally hit 250 followers. So thank you so much, you guys, for all the love, all the support. And besides that, I think it's important to mention next week, I'm going to be having another episode of the Traditional MMA Archive coming out, UFC 14. So excited to cover that. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. And then before we get into it, of course, make sure you follow the brand at OTS Media Co. on all platforms, as well as OTS Media on YouTube. We got coverage on football, basketball, potentially baseball coming up, and MMA every week. So always good stuff coming out of that platform. So make sure you check it out. I just want to say shout out to the Diet Mountain Dew. I got some Mountain Dew right here in the cup too. You don't have to believe it, but I'm being dead ass. We got it all synced up here on the show. But before we jump into everything that is UFC 273, that's the number, right?
Yes, yep.
Right? Awesome.
I can never remember either.
Yeah, there's way too many. But before we jump into that, there was a couple of sort of news and notes I wanted to talk about for the UFC Columbus card. First of all, I just want to say, if there's any test case as to why there shouldn't no longer be cards at the freaking Apex, it was UFC Columbus. I think low-key they're actually a pretty good fight town, all things considered. Every time I've seen events there, the crowd has been awesome and really pulling for their guys. So that was cool to see. But let's be real, man. Like, if they're doing that out in Columbus, like, I'm pretty sure a lot of places across America will be pretty freaking wild. So let's open this thing back up, baby. What are we doing here?
Yeah, dude, I agree. I actually went to a live UFC in Cleveland. I went to the Stipe versus Overeem card, and yeah, that crowd was pretty hot.
Yeah, man. I was actually going to mention that too, because that was one of my favorite moments ever. Like, watching the sport, I was like, man, Stipe is the shit. And he came off like a goddamn superstar there. And the same thing on UFC Columbus too. Everyone was going crazy for him there. So yeah, man, it's a no-brainer. If you got guys from the market and you got a good crowd, like, why are you staying away from that? I don't get why they've only been there like a handful of times. Line them up as much as you can and sort of make use of that. But an awesome night of fights, if you ask me. I think it definitely over-delivered in a lot of spots. But analysis and picks wise, I'm over the hump, man. It took me 3 weeks, but I finally went over 500. I went 7-5 this week. We climbing, baby. That's all that matters. But something that I noticed, and I don't know if this is a common thing, please, I'm willing to hear your thoughts on this, but I feel like whenever I'm picking these fights, I talk myself into potential outcomes a lot more than sort of leaning with what I think is going to happen for the most part. And I love making the case for these people. But I think I need to trust the gut a little bit more. I think sometimes I see potential outcomes in sort of matchups or watching tape. And then I'm like, I sort of go down that rabbit hole in a big way. I think I'm going to try to steer away from that one for this card.
Yeah, I allow myself to kind of get talked out of how I think a fight's going to go by, listening to other cappers or just, having other things brought up that I think through. But I haven't really decided whether it's like overall a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it goes the right way and sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, I still feel like I don't have a sense whether trusting my gut is or isn't the right way to go. We'll see.
That is so true. And I think a perfect example is one of the fights I wanted to talk to you about on this card. Matheus Nicolau coming up against David Dvorak. I was super high on Nicolau coming into the fight. I personally wish I put down more, because I did put down some units on him. Nice. And it didn't sweat at all. Like, in my opinion, I thought it was a very dominant performance, sort of cruised. But my question is, I do a lot of these straight bets, and then they usually play out for the most part pretty well whenever I do straight bets. But I put more juice on the parlay that I had him in. and then that just blows up in my face. So I'm gonna from now on, and I've said it on the show that I'm gonna do it, but now I'm actually gonna fucking do it. No more 3-leg parlays. If it's two or straight bets for me from now on, and I'm gonna start looking at those props a little harder.
That's kind of where I'm at right now too. Is like, I'm still like kind of figuring out who I am as a better, style wise. I'm kind of trying different things. I've been the last few events I've been betting more. Like I always kind of stayed away from chalky money lines. I kind of stayed away from big favorites, and I've been kind of, if I still feel there's value in that line, I've been trying to bet more big favorites. But yeah, like I do really well usually with 2-leg parlays, but as soon as I get up to 3 or more, they end up getting busted too. So I kind of have the same thing going on.
Sure. And shout out to Askarov busting all the parlays this week, I'm pretty sure. I just got to say, I honestly thought, and I don't know, call me biased, I thought he won the fight. So I'm curious to think what you thought about it. But I at the same time, I wasn't mad about it. That's how kind of close of a fight it was, especially that third round, which is what it all hinged on, to be honest. So what were your thoughts on that one?
That's actually a good example of one of those where I kind of allowed other people's opinions to sort of sway me a little bit, because after doing the tape, I had my doubts about that. I was actually going to leave Askarov out of parlays. Like I favored him to win, but I thought he was way too big of a favorite, and I actually thought Kai had a pretty good shot. And after hearing so many other cappers and just seeing things on Twitter, it seemed like I was the only one who was thinking that way. So a lot of times I end up being like, well, if it's like I need to sometimes convince myself that it's okay to be on an island and just trust my own reads. But I start to think like, well, if all of these other sharp people are not seeing what I'm seeing, then I'm probably wrong, and so I did end up putting Askarov in parlays, and it didn't work out for me. As far as who I think won the fight, I actually went to hang out with some friends that night, and that fight was going on while my wife was driving me down to the strip, and I was kind of watching it on my phone, but I missed enough of it that I don't really know. So I can't weigh in there.
I feel you 100%. Yeah, I was just surprised, honestly, because I felt like somehow Kai became like the adopted Columbus representative in that fight. Like everyone was loving Kai, which, I mean, hey, if you come across in that way, I think it does nothing but good things for you as far as your career moving forward. So take what you could get. But sure. I thought that definitely played a part in some way, because the fact that all 3 judges gave it to Kai really blew me away. Like I was like, what? I was super surprised by that. But yeah, I agree. I think I initially was sort of after talking to Wiz, I was initially leaning towards maybe even sprinkling a little bit of money on Kai. But then I was like, you know what? I agree. I saw a lot of other people going with Askarov as well, and I was like, I'll do the same. And then it bit me in the ass. But one leg that stood strong, Manon Fiojo. I am really high on her. I think we said a lot just sort of praising her last week, and everything sort of came off in that way. Obviously, there was some moments where she got hit with a head kick, but besides that, I feel like she looked really flawless and dominant against Jennifer Maia. I'm honestly a little concerned for Maia. I feel like at this stage, not that she's been found out, but she sort of hit the top of the division, and now they're sort of going to matchmake her on the way down. So what do you think they should do with Fiojo next? Because I think they're going to try to rush her right into Shevchenko.
Yeah, she was actually the biggest single money line bet that I've ever made since I started tracking bets. I actually put 8 units on her. And the only other time that I've made a bet like that big, I put 7 units on Tyler Santos when she fought JoJo Wood. I'm very rarely like really confident in a fighter winning. Like I feel like I'm pretty good at seeing all the ways fights can play out, and so often I end up just being like, you know what, I have no idea. This could and Manon Fiojo versus Jennifer Maia was I came out of the tape on that one thinking like, I just don't see how she can lose. And the fight ended up playing out more closely than I thought it was going to. But yeah, I think very highly of her, and I was confident enough that I put literally 8 units on it. So as far as what they're going to do with her, man, I don't know. I don't think I would rather not see her in a title shot quite yet, but at the same time, I guess, how do you match her up otherwise at this point? I mean, she's pretty much right up there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I was thinking the only name as far as non-title shot that makes sense is Chookagian. But at the same time, I feel like stylistically that is a tough matchup, which sort of you don't want to kill the hype either, especially when you
Yeah,
have a division that thin. So yeah, it's a tough spot for the matchmakers, I will admit,
it is.
for sure. And then the last fight, well, two more actually, I wanted to talk about before we move on. Matt Brown, Brian Barberena. I'm pissed off at myself, and I think moving forward, I'm really gonna double down on these lines when I feel them, because I made the case with Wiz on the show that this fight is going the distance, and exactly that's how it played out. And obviously, both guys had their moments where you could have saw a finish sort of coming, but it went the way I ended up thinking it was gonna go. Um, First of all, awesome fucking fight. Like I heard people
It
saying
was.
fight of the year stuff. I don't think it's at that level, but it could be in the conversation come the end of the year. I just want to say Matt Brown's the OG man. Seeing all the new things that he's doing with the tie clinch and sort of implementing knees, elbows in those spots and those trips. Like this guy is awesome. Just super happy for him. Even though he ended up not winning that fight, I think he definitely doesn't come away a loser either.
Yeah, it's awesome to see the career that Matt Brown had, especially given when he was on Tough. He came into the house with a pro record of like 7-6 or something like that. I mean, he was barely a 500 fighter, and I remember I just didn't think highly of him. I mean, I was like in my 20s, like I was kind of like, I mean, looking back now, I was kind of just judging him by that record. You know, I was like, why are they bringing a guy who's 7-6 into the Tough house? You know, but and yeah, I didn't think highly of the guy. He kind of went back and forth on wins and losses, and then eventually had that like 7-fight win streak in the UFC. And I had to admit, I was like, all right, this guy is like the most improved fighter in UFC history or something. But yeah, he went on to have a pretty excellent career for a guy that I thought would wash out of the UFC in a few fights originally.
For sure. And just his life story as well. Like
Yeah.
this guy, talk about maximizing the platform you have, regardless of how high that is. Like you said, just grinding every day and finding a way to continue sort of grinding out these wins and just making a name for yourself. Like in my opinion, I think they should make a version or a wing of the Hall of Fame, whatever you want to call it, for guys like him, guys like Jim Miller, people that just learn how to stick around and get big wins in the UFC. I think that's really important for the history of this sport.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, what do you do with a guy like Matt Brown? I mean, I think Jim Miller's a future Hall of Famer for sure, but like, yeah, a guy like Matt Brown, I mean, he's been around forever. He's got some quality wins, but he's also got a bunch of losses. Like, yeah, as far as another wing, that's an interesting point because it's like, yeah, I mean, can you make a case for Matt Brown being a Hall of Famer? I I don't know, maybe not. It's like, yeah, that's a tough spot because it's like in a way he probably should be, but in a way he's probably not quite there. So what do you do? Yeah.
It's so crazy. And to think about all the hitters at welterweight, the fact that he has the most finishes in that division history is just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Really speaks to the depth of that division because, man, welterweight, I think body composition wise, that's why there's the most fighters in welterweight, in my opinion. Out of most divisions, just most people sort of fall into that range. But it is a deep division, man. Like you could make a career in the UFC and really not be near the top 15 for a majority of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I never thought of that, but yeah, that's and yeah, I never thought about like having a separate wing or something like that. But it's like, yeah, what do you do with these guys who have never quite been the best, never quite been elite, but they've just, you know, they've been company men who have been in the organization forever. They'll take on all comers. They're going to lose a bunch, but they're going to win. You know, they're going to beat. They're great measuring sticks for new fighters coming up. Um, when you put them in there against the elite, they're usually going to lose, but they might pull off one of those once in a while too. And like, yeah, what do you do with those guys? And the sport absolutely needs those figures. You know, I mean, without them, where would the sport be really? You got to have those guys that have these crazy long careers and will fight anybody and will get into a war with anyone, no matter who you put them in there with, and just be fan favorites. Like that's Matt Brown for you.
For sure, man. And that's another one of those fights where you can't really complain either way either with the way the way it went. Like it makes sense either way, and nobody ends up losing really, obviously, besides the paychecks. But do away with that, UFC, please. I know you'll never do it by choice, but somebody needs to get involved to change that show win structure. Because you watch a fight like that and you're like, no matter what these guys paid, it's not enough, straight up. But the final thing I wanted to touch on, the main event, man, I was surprised. I was one of the few people that I saw that was leaning towards Dawkins. And now I'm gonna admit, I got trapped here, and I'm fine with it because I think I really do consider potential when I'm looking into matches like this and where I think fighters are in their career. And I still don't think this is worst case scenario for Chris Daukaus. I think he's going to bounce back from this. And if anything, really learn a lot of the areas that he needs to improve to be a more well-rounded fighter. But at the same time, I see the trap that I fell into. I was really big on him because of what he could potentially do. But you can't be too upset about it when the person he was fighting in Curtis Blades comes out and does shit that we haven't seen them do. So I don't feel too bad about the read in retrospect, but at the same time, man, Curtis Blades, I honestly think, I mean, just listen to this because I heard this stat and I had to make sure I mentioned it on this show. The fact that Curtis Blades has the most takedowns in heavyweights history at 61, and number 2 is Cain Velasquez at 32.
Yeah.
That's insane. And he's so young as well in his career. I think I'm just super high on Blades now moving forward. And a lot of the things that I said really came to bite me in the ass in this one. So shout out to Curtis Blades. The improvement that they're doing over there at Elevation Fight Team is tangible, dude.
Yeah, last I looked at his stats, he I think it was 6.22 takedowns per 15 minutes, which is incredible in any weight class, but yeah, especially at heavyweight. Like I think we talked about this last time we did a show together, just that you know, a big part of I think what determines how successful a takedown based fighter or a wrestling based fighter is simply really sticking to the desire and having the cardio to continue to work for takedowns. You know, we'll often see fighters. Mackenzie Dern comes to mind. I was just watching that Marina Rodriguez fight, and it's almost like she'll shoot for one takedown, and if she doesn't get it, she just won't try again for the rest of the round. And I don't know if that's like concern for the cardio or what it is exactly, but fighters who know that they want the takedown and will just sell out and work for it and work for it and work for it and have the cardio to do that are really, really dangerous. And Curtis Blades is one of those fighters. And, you know, he's a guy that, you know, obviously he's been stopped 3 times in the UFC. There's a certain kind of fighter that he has trouble with, and we've seen that. But of course, he's always improving. He's still really young for a heavyweight. And I've still considered that Curtis Blades is probably going to be a heavyweight champion at some point. I've thought that for a long time. And then after seeing this fight against Daukaus, like, you know, I ended up moving to, not only do I think Curtis Blades is going to be a heavyweight champion, I think Curtis Blades might reign as a heavyweight champion for a long time and end up being in the conversation for, you know, the best heavyweight we've ever seen. I mean, is he 30 years old? He's not very old for a heavyweight. And like, yeah, I think that guy's got a lot of career ahead of him, and he's already amazing, and he's only going to get more amazing. And I think that I think he ends up in the GOAT discussion at some point.
And that's such a good call, man. And I think the improvements in this one, like the fact that you didn't even shoot for a takedown or think of shooting for a takedown or faint it, like none of that, just entirely striking based in a way that we haven't seen from him before, but also very impressive. Like just from the reads he was giving with his jab, like I was super surprised just how educated it was, on top of sort of getting reactions out of Chris Daukaus. I was blown away by the sort of leap there, and I agree. I think I'm very high on Blades now, and I'm not going to get trapped again anytime soon. I'll tell you that.
And to think about what that says, not only about how his skills are improving and about how he's rounding out his game, but also about the confidence, also about, you know, going out there and understanding, not only have his hands improved, has his whole striking game improved, but to go out there and be confident enough in those improvements to show them against someone as dangerous as Daukaus is really impressive. To not feel like he needs to go to his bread and butter. I mean, how does he win every fight he wins, you know? And he didn't go out there and feel like he needed to do that. He trusted in his hands enough to make it happen. And I think that's really impressive.
Dude, and I'll tack on to that even more. The fact that it was against someone who's known for his knockout power, where he's been knocked out before in this division against guys that are big punchers. 2 of them being Ngannou, which I don't blame anyone for. I'll just say that outright. But yeah, man, to reinforce that confidence with a performance like that, like this is a scary matchup for anyone in this division. And if I'm Stipe, I'm like, nah, I'll wait for John Jones. Give me John Jones. I'm not fighting that guy.
Love it.
Yeah, man. So I'm super excited for this fight card. So we just might as well jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Our first matchup of the night, we have Piera Rodriguez coming up against Kay Hansen. Now, I'll let you take the lead on this one because I don't really have too much of a read, but I will say I'm going to be checking lines for this because right now I haven't been able to find one. But if I could find a Kay Hansen at a favorite odds, I'm at least putting 3 units on Rodriguez just for the fade.
Yeah, you're going to hear me say this a lot. Like this ended up being a card. I finished all my like initial tape study. I'm still kind of going back and doing some simply because I have so many fights on this card where I just don't feel like I have a great read yet. Yeah, for this, I watched a little bit of tape on Rodriguez. And yeah, the line is pretty much a coin flip last I looked, and I think that's probably accurate. I mean, Rodriguez she's a powerful striker. I mean, she's a little bit flat-footed and doesn't use a lot of movement. She kind of is one of those fighters who's sort of just waiting for her opponent to come in so she can counter with big strikes. I think Kay Hansen is probably the more well-rounded fighter. Obviously, she's got the higher level experience, but yeah, I came away from the tape here feeling like it's probably pretty close to a coin flip, which is what the odds are saying. If I was gonna bet it, I would maybe look to Kay Hansen by decision or something like that. But yeah, I'm staying away from this one for now. I don't really know what to do with it.
That's a good shout for sure. I would just say when we first looked at the lines, Kay Hansen was a big favorite, so that makes a lot of sense. That things are sort of inching closer. Yeah, 100%. I'm gonna stay away from this one if it's near anything larger or I mean smaller than minus 150. But yeah, for the most part, I think Kay Hansen. I don't know. I like her game. Like I feel like against certain opponents, she's gonna be able to get wins in the UFC. But at the same time, I just feel like, especially in women's MMA, like there's a lot of bills that you see that you're just like, wow, you're very small for this weight class, and there's
Yeah.
nowhere really for you to go down or up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point. She does almost have one of those physiques, one of those bodies where she doesn't quite fit in either of the weight classes she could be in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. And I've been a proponent of atom weight. I think honestly, that's a bigger, more talent rich division than 125 for the women's divisions. But at the same time, I get why the UFC would be afraid to jump into that market because historically it hasn't been a big draw, which is understandable. But I love me some lower weight fights. I just got to say they're always filled with crazy action. Uh,
Absolutely.
but next, well, if I had to get a pick out of you, gun to your head, who are you going with in this one?
I'll go Hansen.
Okay.
Not confident at all.
I feel you. I feel you. So next up, Vince Pichel coming up against Mark Madsen. I went back and forth on this one. I'm not gonna lie, and I think a big part of it has to do with what I was saying. I fall into earlier. I like Mark Madsen's game, but it's nowhere near a finished product. And if you're betting on Mark Madsen here, it's entirely based off potential. I would say this is another one of those fights that I'm probably not going to touch unless he ends up somewhere near a plus 180 underdog, which at this point doesn't look like we're getting there. So I think it makes sense to ride with Pichel in this one and maybe even consider him for a parlay piece.
Yeah, this is another one where I don't feel real confident, and the lines are pretty close, and I think I agree with that. I was just watching some tape on this last night. I think Pichel can be. I put in my notes here something like at times he reminds me of a tamed down Tim Elliott. He's got some kind of awkward movement, and I think he's kind of a tough guy to figure out. And I do think overall he probably has a more complete game than Mark Madsen. I like that Pichel is kind of one of those fighters that comes alive more and more as the fight goes on. He can sometimes do his best work in round 3. I love fighters that are like that. So, as for a pick, I kind of think I end up leaning Vince Pichel. If I was going to bet this fight, I was almost looking at maybe betting it to go to decision. I do think this fight probably goes to decision, but yeah, for now, no bet for me. And I don't really have a strong read either way on it.
That's a great shout. I didn't even think about that, but I agree. I think Mark Madsen has shown that he has a good chin, and the only reason I'm entirely sort of stepping away from that Mark Madsen play is I just feel like, especially if you get tricked up by Clay Guida in this latter half of his career, I think you're gonna have problems against someone that's as tricky as Pichel, which is exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, man. So next up, we can move right along. Julio Arce coming up against Daniel Santos. I'm gonna be very honest. I have done no prep on this, so I'm just going. I'm just I'm just gonna be honest off rip. That's how we are here at the MMA Archive. But I'm going Julio Arce just because I started doing kickboxing at Tiger Showman's. That's my pick.
Nice. I did watch some tape on Daniel Santos, and I like this kid. He's got that classic shoot a box style, that nice Muay Thai stance, and he kind of throws those big winging shots, and I just love that, that kind of classic shoot a box style. I do think the kid's pretty good. He's sitting at plus 170 right now. It's a tough, it's one of those things where you end up having to kind of take into account the level of competition that he's been up against, and that he's going to be taking a pretty big step up here. If they had pretty much had the same level of competition, and were both in a spot where they'd been fighting in the UFC for about the same amount of time, I would potentially like Santos here. Like I like his game, and I like what he's capable of, but that step up kind of scares me off. But if I was gonna bet it, I would probably look to bet the underdog here potentially. I'm not going to at this point, so I'm kind of in a spot where it's like, if I had to pick, I'm probably picking Arce, but not confidently. If I had to bet it, I would potentially look at Santos. But I think this is going to be a fun fight.
And I think the fact that they've the UFC that is tried to matchmake him against Timur Valiev and Marcelo Rojo, they clearly are high on him as well.
Yeah.
So that's something to look out for. I think for an entry level UFC fight, I mean, those are three killers that you signed the contract for. So really, really hyped to see this one. At the same time, I don't know if this is, please correct me if I'm wrong from what you heard. But I heard something about Daniel Santos actually being from Lyoto Machida's camp. And the fact that you mentioned that he has that sort of traditional Muay Thai style tripped me out. So I'm like, is this accurate? Am I just making shit up here? I hope I'm not.
I don't know. I didn't hear anything about that.
Okay. So yeah, sorry, blasphemy if I did. I won't do it again, I promise. Next up, we got Mike Malott coming up against Mickey Gall. So this fight is interesting to me. I'm going to be very honest, because a lot of people do the traditional Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series fade thing, which I get. But when I was looking at this fight, I agree. I think Mickey Gall has definitely made a lot of improvements in his UFC career from where he started to where he is now. It's very tangible. You could see those things. They jump out. But at the same time, I never was high on his game. I always just felt like there was more there as far as athletic potential than there has been as far as putting it together. And at that stage of his career, that makes a lot of sense. So I don't want to be in a spot where I'm sort of banking on that potential again, or sort of going up with another person who is just potential at this moment. So I'm staying away from this fight entirely. I'm just going to say that off rip. But as far as a pick, I think you might want to look at Mike Malott here, just as the good old Mickey Gall fade. And if I end up doing anything on this, it'll be that.
I pretty much agree with everything you said. Like a lot of what I typed up on my notes is kind of what you said, that, I mean, Gall was brought into the UFC too early, pretty much specifically because they needed somebody to fight CM Punk. That was on that Cleveland card that I went to, the CM Punk and Mickey Gall. And yeah, like Mickey Gall has, I would say he has overachieved for what I expected of him. He's one of those guys who's hanging around. He's winning some, he's losing some. But yeah, I'm just not real impressed with his game. I don't think he's particularly good. He has improved a lot, and I'm not trying to, talk shit on the guy, but I'm just not particularly impressed with his game. I think Gall is pretty hittable. I think Malott's a pretty decent striker and hits pretty hard. I think Malott is pretty well-rounded. Yeah, like I do. If I had to make a pick here, I would pick Malott, but it's almost like the last fight. Last I looked, Mickey Gall was at like plus 175. If I was going to make a bet, I would potentially sprinkle the underdog here, but I do think I probably lean Malott to win, but it's another one where I don't feel real confident in the pick.
For sure. I just have to ask because I feel like this jumped out at me. What would you think of a in the distance play on this fight?
I was actually just thinking about that right before we came on to do the show here. I would have to do a little more digging on that, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about. I think it's worth looking at. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. But we'll move on because this fight right here, I think, is going to need a little bit more time than people would think. Jairzinho Rozenstruik coming up against Marcin Tybura. I'm just going to say, when I first started sort of my super fandom in MMA, Risen really captivated me and really took me under its hold. So I'm a big Jairzinho fan. I feel like I've been following him before a lot of people even knew who he was. But something you mentioned in your tweets, which I wanted to throw to you, is the fact that they just been lying about this dude. Like, I love that you tweeted about that because even when he first came in, I'm like, there's no way this dude is 6'4". And the fact that you sort of made light to that, I was like, yeah, thank you. Because I noticed that a long time ago, but I never was able to sort of make a mention of it. But in this matchup, initially, my thoughts were, Rozenstruik, very patient. And against somebody like Tybura, I feel like that's where 100% you're going to end up finding openings and landing strikes against someone like that. Just he's pretty hittable from all that I remember in all his UFC fights. But at the same time, he is very durable, which makes this a very tricky one for me because Jairzinho has shown to have scary power, but at the same time is also shown to sort of get caught staring in the mirror sometimes. And in a matchup like this, where I feel like all things considered, on the feet, we could end up in a situation where both of these guys are kind of waiting on each other because Tybura does that a lot as well. But the more I thought about it, I started leaning towards Tybura here. And please talk me out of it because I feel like I need to be talked out of it. But as far as just overall game, he's shown his ability to wrestle and get people down to the ground, albeit not consistently. So I feel like the fact that you have a more complete game in a matchup like this, where I could see them ending up on the ground, either from someone getting dropped or not. I just feel like I tend to lean towards the fighter that has a more complete MMA game and has shown the ability to use it. At the same time, though, Jairzinho could just spark him out in a couple of seconds. So not super confident, but I'm leaning Tybura on this one.
I actually feel the same way. Again, not confidently, but I think if I had to make a pick here and make a bet, Tybura would be both for me, I think. And that's largely based on kind of like you mentioned, like when you have a situation where, because Jairzinho is not a guy who's going to win a decision. I don't think he's ever won a decision. He's pretty much reliant on finding that finish to win. And so it becomes one of those situations where you're choosing between a fighter whose win condition is finding a particular moment, like catching lightning in a bottle in a particular moment, versus a fighter whose win condition is potentially more of a consistent process, And I think when you have a fighter whose win condition is more of a process, that's something that you can trust a little more. Obviously, it doesn't always work, but in doing the tape here, I watched Tybura's fight with Walt Harris, and that kind of gave me some confidence as he did get blasted with some big punches early there. And, he got rocked, he got hurt, but he managed to survive it while he was, if I remember correctly, while he was hurt, he was kind of wobbly and he went for the takedown. I mean, he had the wherewithal to understand that he needed to get it to the ground to clear his head. I liked to see that. So, I mean, we did see some things there that make me think that he could potentially make the right decisions and do the right things against Jairzinho, even if he does get caught and get hurt early. But, this is another fight where the betting lines are really close. And I agree with that because you can kind of go through different scenarios in your head as far as how it might play out, and they all kind of make sense. So yeah, it's a tough one to call, but if I was going to bet it, I think I would take I think Tybura was at like maybe plus 130, something like that last time I looked. This is one of those where, honestly, this is one of those fights where if I was going to bet it, I think I'd bet the dog. If Jairzinho was at plus 130, I'd bet him here too. It's just a close enough fight that I would just take the plus money if I was going to. But yeah, I'm going to lean toward Tybura to either wrestle his way to decision or even potentially find a finish late on the ground with ground and pound probably.
That's a great show. I need to start thinking about betting like that a lot more because I feel like I tend to think about all the things we just talked about, and then just side immediately with whoever I'm leaning towards instead of considering the lines in a matchup like that. Because I agree. I think either of those outcomes are just as likely as the other. Like, I feel like just how hittable Tybura is makes it a scary thing to sort of bet on him. So that's a really good shout. Another thing I wanted to mention, I'm showing my age here, I'm sorry, but I had to mention it. I've never thought of win conditions in the UFC. I don't know why. I'm a competitive Pokemon battler, and that's why I said I'm going to show my age here, because that's something that I think about all the time when creating my teams. Like, what is going to be the way that I win this battle? And the fact that I've never connected that to MMA, I feel stupid right now. So thank you for that, because I feel like that's really going to inform the way I think about fights a lot moving forward. I think that's just a great way to look at it, and it's so true in this matchup. The sort of way you laid it out, that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I had something I was going to add there and I forgot what it was. Never mind. It slipped my mind.
You're all good. Sorry. I know I bummed you out with that Pokemon shout out. I had to, though.
It's not at all. Not at all.
So next,
go ahead. Pokemon Stadium. I used to play Pokemon Stadium on, was it must have been Nintendo or Nintendo 64, maybe? Yep. I can't remember which one. Yeah, when I was in college, I used to play that game.
All-time great game as well, just because of the announcers. Like, those dudes are hilarious. But we'll move on here. We'll get back on track, because I know everyone is like, what the fuck are they talking about? The next fight on this card, I actually think is a better fight than the original fight we had slated. Anthony Hernandez coming up against Josh Fremd, who's a newcomer in the UFC, but I've seen him fight multiple times in the LFA. I have a pretty strong lean on this one, so I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are.
I watched a little bit of tape on Fremd. I hadn't seen him before. I wasn't familiar with him previously. Huge guy for the division. He's one of those dudes who, when you watch him strike, he doesn't look powerful, but he knocks people out. So he must be, you know what I mean? Like, some guys, they really sit down on their punches and you can really tell by the way they throw, like, wow, that guy's throwing heat, you know? And he's one of those guys who, the way he throws, it doesn't look like he's sitting down super hard. It doesn't look, you know, he just good technique, I suppose, you know, like, he just knows what he's doing. But yeah, he doesn't look like he's loading up, but when he lands, it hurts people. So clearly he does hit hard. Yeah, this is one of those where I always have such a tough time making a confident read when it's a guy making his UFC debut. Like, how much do you take that into account with your capping? You know, I mean, some people are almost like, oh, I do not bet on debutantes, you know, like, and I don't necessarily feel that way, but it's at the same time, it is something you kind of have to take into account a little bit and just figure out, well, how much of a difference does it make here? And I don't really know. I forgot. Do you have the lines up in front of you? I forgot what the line was on this one.
No, but I'm gonna check them right now.
I don't have it pulled up right now, but I think Fremd was like plus 150 or thereabouts, which I don't mind that. Like, I don't know. I want to do
155 for Fremd.
Okay.
Minus 180 for Hernandez.
I have a few fights on this card where, especially since we've got extra time before the card happens, that I actually can go back and watch more tape and kind of figure some stuff out. And this is one where I need to do that. So I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say about it. So, since you've seen Fremd before, I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on him.
Yeah, so I saw him get knockout wins as well as a knockout loss against Gregory Rodriguez. Mm-hmm. And that was why I was very high on Gregory Rodriguez, because I was like, Josh Fremd is fucking good. Like, let me get that clear. I'm also a fan of Anthony Hernandez. So I think the way I'm looking at this is sort of the true outcome sort of way of looking at this, where if you're going to bet on Fremd, obviously you could go for that money line because he's a big enough dog. But at the same time, I think going for a sort of round prop for a knockout is the best way to look at it, especially early. I think we've seen people jump on Anthony Hernandez and him have issues with that in the first round. So I think that's an interesting play. But at the same time, I feel like the longer the fight goes, the more it plays into Anthony Hernandez's skill set and especially just experience as well. So if you're going to bet Hernandez, I think it's worth looking at by decision in this one. But at the same time, if you're going to bet Josh Fremd, it's probably going to be by knockout. And I feel like just his process, like he does throw to the body, but not as much as he does to the head. And I think that's going to come to play in this fight. So I'm leaning towards Fremd in this one. But at the same time, I won't be surprised at all if he ends up losing here as well.
Yeah, those are some good points as far as, looking at the potentially looking at round props and looking at a decision prop and that sort of thing for this fight. But yeah, it sounds like, I mean, if you like Frem to win here, it sounds like you might have a bet on your hands there, sir, because he's an underdog.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely need to consider it before the week gets started. So if you gun to your head, what is your pick in this matchup? As of right now, things are subject to change.
You know what? I'm going to pick Fremd. Let's do it just for fun.
Let's do it. Why not? Next up, Ian Gary versus Darian Weeks. I said this last week when me and Marty did the rapid fire picks for this one. I just feel like in this matchup, there's no way that I would look at Darian Weeks and think, you know, this guy can win, unless I'm just assuming that Ian Gary is going to fade. And we've seen him fade and still get knockouts. So that scares me away from sort of potentially going with the dog here. But at the same time, long term, I don't think I'm very high on Ian Gary as a prospect. I feel like his process is very similar to McGregor in all the worst ways. Like just sort of hoping that everything works out the way it needs to. And if it doesn't, sort of you see everything falling apart from there. I think long term, I'm definitely going to be fading Ian Gary, but in this one, I think you have to side with them. But I'm staying away from this one. I'm not playing it at all.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said. This is a fight where I have like a ton. I have like a page plus of single space notes on this fight. I had a bunch of thoughts while I was doing the tape, and yeah, Ian Gary. Well, both of these guys kind of. I'm just not quite sure how I rate them or what I think about. I don't think very highly of Darian Weeks. Ian Gary, obviously he's a highly touted prospect. I feel like I see the potential in him. Like I see what people are seeing, but I don't think I'm very impressed with the fighter that he is now necessarily. Like I do think he has the potential to be something pretty special. He's still, I think he's only like 24 or something like that. He's still pretty young. He has a pretty well-rounded game. Like he has a nice skill set, but I still feel like, I don't even know how to articulate this exactly, but I still feel like when I'm watching him in the ring that I'm not quite sure if he knows what he's trying to do from moment to moment. Like almost like, which almost can be a positive thing in a way, because it's almost like he has skills in every area and he's just not sure which skills he wants to use from moment to moment. I don't know if that makes sense the way I'm describing it, but I just sort of, he seems a little listless. Like he's like, I can do this and I can do this, and which one should I do? I'm not sure what to do. So, which, like I said, could be a good thing, because it means he has a lot of skills and he's got a lot of time to to put them together into a more complete MMA game. So yeah, I think he's got a lot of potential. Not sure how high I am on him right at the moment. This is one of those lines that I think, what is he at, like minus 360 or something like that? That does seem wide, but at the same time, I don't have any interest in putting anything on Darian Weeks here, because I don't think particularly highly of him. I did put Ian Gary in a parlay when he was at like minus 270. I parlayed him with Imavov, so that turned into a straight bet on Ian Gary, which I don't feel great about, but whatever, it's there. Another thing that I was possible bet that I was looking at here was they set the over under at 1.5 here, and I was possibly looking at the over 1.5 as I maybe Ian Gary finds that early finish, but I don't think super highly of Darian Weeks, but I think he's pretty capable and he's pretty tough, and I think there's a decent shot this goes over 1.5.
I just had a very interesting revelation as you was talking about Ian Gary, because I felt this exact same way about Mark Diakese, and that's why I picked against him last week. And it definitely came to bite me in the ass. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But as far as long-term sort of growth, I'm interested to see how that plays out, because like I said, if you're well, like you said, I mean to say, if you see those different aspects of the MMA game, I think it's important to be able to bring those things to bear. At the same time, though, when you start gassing out in your first UFC fight, I don't want to make that an automatic. This is what you're gonna do, because obviously nerves are a big part of that. But at the same time, I just feel like he's one to put it on people, and eventually you're going to fight someone that's going to be able to take that heat. And we saw that same exact thing with Mark Diakese's career. So long term, I'm still on that vibe, fading Ian Gary long term, but interested to see how it works out. But hey, much better line on your straight play than you would get now. So might as well keep it.
Yeah. It is what it is for now.
Yes, sir. This is another replacement fight coming up next that I actually think is a better, more competitive fight than the original fight slated. We got Aspen Ladd coming up against Raquel Pennington. Now, the more I think about this fight, the more I'm like, I don't really care. And it's not that I don't care about either of these women, but I just feel like long term, I've sort of fell out of love with their prospects in the division with both of these ladies. At the same time, though, I feel like if anyone has the higher sort of platform at the moment, it'll be Aspen Ladd. But just going off of sort of experience, well-rounded game, and clinch striking specifically. I'm going to be going with Raquel Pennington in this one just because I feel like she could really put it on Aspen Ladd in a way that we've seen she doesn't take too well to. At the same time, though, like, will I be surprised if Aspen Ladd somehow drops her and finishes her with a rear naked choke? Not at all. But at the same time, I just feel like at this point of Aspen Ladd's career, you can't really be confident going to the window with her. So I'm picking Rocky Pennington here in this one.
Yeah, I feel much the same way. Like my kind of like overarching read on this fight is that Aspen Ladd can win this fight if she has the very best day she's ever had in the octagon. You know what I mean? Like if she puts out her like best case, best possible performance, I think it's a winnable fight for her, but I don't trust her to do that. And so I do like Raquel for that reason. I know Raquel is filling in late, which is pretty much the only reason that I didn't bet on her here. I think she's, what is she up as high as like maybe minus 180, minus 190, something like that. But she opened at a little bit better line. And I looked at it and I was like, God, I like, skill set wise, I like Raquel to win this fight, but I'm a little bit concerned about the late notice. Otherwise I probably would have bet her here, but yeah, I like Raquel. Potentially even to look at Raquel by decision if you're not too terribly concerned about the late notice. But yeah, we've seen Aspen Ladd get boxed up pretty badly and just kind of get stymied in the stand up and get and feel and almost look like she just is kind of just out of sorts and isn't really sure what to do on the feet. And Rocky's a pretty good boxer, and I think if Ladd's not able to push Rocky against the cage and clinch and not able to take her down and turn it into the fight that she wants to have, I think she's going to get boxed up pretty bad here.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I'm just really interested to see, and I hate to be this guy to bring this up, but what's going to be the sort of the bounce back performance after all the heat her and her coach got after the last fight that she had. And obviously she's had a lot of issues making it to these fights. So I feel like a lot is sort of riding on this performance and getting a matchup like this. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think she would have had an even harder time against Irene Aldana. But at the same time, I just think it's such a tough matchup to try to overcome all the things that she's facing right now. So really good shouts there. All right. I just want to make this very clear. This main card has me excited in a way that I haven't been for an event like in a while. Like there's a lot of really fun spots on this with the way things sort of shuffled out. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of these fights are trap fights. Like I feel like a lot of these fights you're gonna end up in spots where you're like, I pretty sure this is gonna happen, and then some random shit happens. But let's dive right into this one. Kelvin Gastelum coming up against Dricus du Plessis. Now, I'm gonna throw this one to you, but I'm gonna say this off rip. I saw Kelvin Gastelum fight Chris Weidman live in Long Island, and that was exciting as hell to watch because I honestly was low key going for Kelvin Gastelum. Like I've been a fan of him for a long time, and he put it on Chris Weidman in that first round. Now, how is that applicable in this fight? Not very, because of this. Now, long term, I think du Plessis is 100% the bigger prospect, has the bigger ceiling, in my opinion, in the division. But at the same time, I feel like there's so many questions that need to be answered um, of him, as well as many questions that need to be answered for Gastelum. I feel like he's shown the ability to sort of wrestle at a very, very high level. And has also shown recently that he's not going down that path, even in matchups where you would think he would. So I'm a little concerned if you're at all thinking of going for the underdog here. At the same time, in this matchup, I feel like his cardio and his wrestling acumen can really give Drickus problems, like especially if he ends up getting hurt early on in this fight, which I think is a possibility, and sort of battling back from that. So there's just so much going on in this one. I'll throw to you before I give my pick, but I just want to say stay away from this, guys. I don't know if you agree. Stay away from this, guys, because there's just too many variables.
Yeah, so far I do agree. I did the tape on both of these guys when they were still with their previous matchups. And once this matchup got put together, even though I already did the tape and had notes, I want to go back and do it again. Because the way when I talked about sort of like my tape study process on that other episode we did, like now I need to go back and kind of watch their tendencies with the other guy's tendencies in mind, because even though I have all these notes, I'm like, I don't know if I took note of the right things, kind of, so I need to go back and watch Drickus du Plessis with the idea of him fighting Gastelum and vice versa. So this is another one where I feel like I don't have a strong read at the moment, but like, so Kelvin, I think if I'm not mistaken, Kelvin has only won like 3 of his last 10 or something like that, but he's been up against killers every time. I mean, if you look at his recent strength of schedule, it's absolutely insane, and nobody's blowing him out of there. I mean, he's hanging in there. It depends on where you draw the line of elite, I guess, but Kelvin is either elite or right on the cusp, even though he's a guy who's 3-7 in his last 10, because he's going in there against the best in the world, and he competes capably against all of them. And with that in mind, like, this is a pretty huge step up in competition for Drickus here. And I do think that I think Drickus is, I like watching him a lot. I think he has, obviously he hits super hard. He's got a nice striking game. He's also got a bunch of guillotine and rear naked choke finishes in his pre UFC career. So I mean, he's obviously capable. He's got some wrestling. He's obviously got some jujitsu. He's a decently well-rounded fighter. But this is he's a lot bigger than Kelvin, but so is everybody else that Kelvin's been fighting. I mean, he's definitely accustomed to that. Yeah, I do have to favor Kelvin to win here. I feel like unless the only way I can really see Drickus winning is finding a knockout, and I don't feel like that's particularly likely. Like, I feel like Kelvin is probably going to be the better minute winner. I feel like Kelvin can probably have success going to his wrestling here if he decides to. Yeah, as far as a bet, there's nothing here that interests me at the moment. Maybe I'll change my mind when I go back and watch the tape a little bit more. But yeah, I would lean to Kelvin to win by decision here. But I'm sounding like a broken record, but not a confident pick. But that's where I'd be going with it.
Yeah, man, I agree with you. I feel like whenever I think about this matchup, I'm immediately like, well, Kelvin is the more proven fighter at this stage of his career. At the same time, though, I think the loss that Drickus did suffer outside of the UFC, I think that guy is really fucking good. And if I'm not mistaken, Roberto Soldic is coming to the UFC at some point.
Oh, okay.
So that's exciting as well. I feel like that's going to come to bear long term. But I think also something that bothers me with that matchup is, like, obviously Roberto Soldic has a very similar sort of left straight, left high kick game, sort of very mirroring Mirko Cro Cop, if you ask me. And that scares me because obviously I don't think Kelvin Gastelum has that striking style at all. Let me just say that off rip. I don't think he has that style at all. But long term in this matchup, I could see him lacing Drickus with that straight left or even straight punches in general as this fight goes on. Because I feel like Drickus, I mean, with a frame like that, it's going to be hard not to gas no matter who you're fighting. I just think it really comes down to whether or not Kelvin is willing to wrestle. Because I feel like if he shows that sort of overall game, the way we've seen him capable to do, I think he makes it look easy. So I'm kind of blown away that he's an underdog here. At the same time, though, what you said is the reason why I'm like, let me just stay away from this, because I could see Drick as obviously catching him with something and knocking him out. But shout out Safe Side, you. I just picture him in my head screaming at Rashad Coulter, saying he's a big old Mexican with a big old head. You're not gonna knock him out. And that's sort of what I see happening here. So I agree with you. I sort of want to favor Gastelum. I feel like he should be the favorite, but I think my official pick will be Drickus because I don't think Kelvin, unfortunately, is willing to mix the martial arts in that way anymore. But I won't be surprised if he ends up with a wrestling heavy attack in this one either.
I think Kelvin is a small favorite here, isn't he?
From what I see here on the UFC, no. What I see on the UFC website, it says Drickus is a minus 200 favorite with the Kelvin Gastelum as the plus 170 underdog.
Oh, I've got my William Hill app pulled up right now. Gastelum is minus 150 and Drickus is plus 130.
Cool. Yep. And I'm pretty sure the UFC's lines are like mixed of a whole bunch of different official lines there. But that's interesting. What do you think now that you see that line? Do you think that sort of makes you want to look at Gastelum a little harder when you go through that second round of tape?
Potentially, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, like if I was gonna bet Drickus here, I would almost certainly look to bet him by KO. I think because that's how I see him winning if he does. But yeah, I don't know. I gotta watch it. I gotta go back.
It's enticing.
I don't know how to feel about this one.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to see this fight. I think no matter how it plays out, I think it's going to tell us a lot about both these guys. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, man. I think nobody gave a harder fight to Israel Adesanya than Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah, that was a great fight.
Yeah, man. So I feel bad fading him in general, just because the way his career has gone. But at the same time, I just feel like long term, he should really consider doing everything he can to end up back at welterweight. I feel like he'll just have a much better career path there than here at middleweight.
Yeah, I feel like Kelvin is an example of one of my favorite fighter archetypes that just like constantly overachieving underdog. You know, like he's a classic overachiever in my opinion. He's been undersized against like every opponent that he's fought. He manages to bring it and have fantastic fights against the best fighters in the world, despite being a guy that you maybe wouldn't expect that from. Like, yeah, I like Kelvin. He brings it. He can at least stay right in there with anybody, and I love that.
I agree, man, 100%. So either way, no matter how this shit plays out, it's going to be fucking exciting. So make sure you tune in. Ilir Latifi versus Alexei Oleinik. Now, I was frantically checking the UFC website here. I think they just made an error. They have Alexei Oleinik listed as facing Jared Vanderaa instead of facing Ilir Latifi. So I'm like, is there something that hasn't been announced yet? Or is this just a website fuck up? I tend to think it's a website fuck up because this UFC website is absolute dog shit and they don't update it as often as they should. But let's just cap the original matchup, Ilir Latifi versus Alexei Oleinik here. I think I have basically the same read I had last week. I feel like this matchup, something that you mentioned on Twitter that I think is very funny is like people are like, well, Ilir Latifi don't have no neck. And it's like, I'll let you take that away when you go back because I agree with you. That's bullshit. Like that doesn't mean anything, like regardless of what you think it may mean, especially when you're facing someone like Alexei Oleinik who has shown time and time again that he does shit that just doesn't make sense. Like no matter how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be exciting, dumb shit. Like I think that's how this is going to play out. I tend to lean towards Ilir Latifi just because I feel like he's shown a really good game at heavyweight. Like I think he won that fight against Derek Lewis. A lot of people tend to disagree. But at the same time, wrestling against someone with that submission acumen is a scary prospect. And I said this as well last week. I'm going to say it again. I think Alexei Oleinik has sneaky power as well. So I feel like he could end up in some tough spots diving on those shots. So I will never make a bet on this fight, but this is going to be one of those that I'm going to be super excited to watch for absolutely no reason, just because I know the range of things that could happen is probably much larger than most fights.
I really want to piggyback on that last point that you said there, as far as the range of things that can happen here. And that's why I've had a really hard time getting a read on this fight, is because not only is there a range of things that could, ways that this fight could play out, but I feel like I don't even, with most fights, I at least feel like, okay, fighter A, this is their path to victory, and this is what they're going to want to do here, and what they're going to try to do here, and this is what fighter B wants, and this is what they're going to try to do. I feel like I don't know what either fighter is necessarily even going to try to do in this fight. I mean, Latifi's a guy who sometimes looks to wrestle, but like you said, do you want to be on the ground, even if you are on top? Do you want to be on the ground against Alexei Oleinik, even if he's on his back? Oleinik's a guy, like you said, he's got sneaky power. He's not a fantastic boxer by any means, but he's got that big overhand right. He can catch people. He can hurt people. Is this a fight where they're going to end up doing a fair amount of boxing? Is this a fight where they're going to end up clinched against the cage a lot? Are we going to see a lot of work on the ground? I feel like I really just don't have a clear idea of, I don't know if he's actually, I posted a question on Twitter a while back, just asking people, like, how do you see this fight playing out? Is it going to be mostly on the feet, mostly on the ground, a mix of both? Because I just kind of wanted to see what people were thinking, because I feel like I just really don't know. I mean, this fight we could see a weird, sloppy 15-minute boxing match here. I don't know. Like, I just really, so it's really tough for me to feel confident in how this fight's going to play out. I'm going to pick Latifi as well, simply because I do think he's probably technically the better striker of the two. He's the smaller guy. Like, it feels weird to ever use the word small with Latifi, but he is undersized at heavyweight, unless you count the width. Like, he's as wide as a heavyweight, but he's still a small guy for heavyweight. But yeah, I feel like this is one of those fights that I could just talk about forever, because I really just don't know where to go with it. But yeah, I'm gonna pick Latifi. It's not a confident pick. If I was gonna bet it, I would probably look at it. What is it? I know when it was lined before, when the fight was set up before, I think Latifi was at like -170. Okay, Latifi's at -210, Oleinik at +180. I mean, if I was going to bet a money line there, I'd probably bet Oleinik. I'm not going to touch it, but I would potentially look at betting Oleinik by sub, maybe. I don't think it's a super likely outcome, but yeah, this is one of those where I just don't know where to go with it, man. I really don't.
I agree 100%. And that's why I was like, this is going to be fun, dumb shit. Because no matter what, it's heavyweight variables on top of two guys that I feel like, for the most part, it's hard to get a read on them in general. So I agree with a lot of the things you said there. I just feel like on the feet, I hate to say this, I feel like I'm kind of want to give the edge to Oleinik, and it only lasts for a round and a half. Like, let me make that clear. As far as long-term cardio, like, that's not something that Alexei Oleinik has. But yeah, super strange, but I admit, very exciting. Like, I'm very excited to watch this fight, regardless of whether or not I have a good hand on it or not. So it looks like we're both going with Latifi here, which makes sense. This next matchup, man, you talked about this earlier, and I think this, honestly, I would love to hear the line before I start, just so I could get an idea of what it is right now.
I think it's pretty close to a coin flip last I looked at it. That you could get a little bit of plus money on Dern earlier, but I think she might be actually a small favorite now. I'm trying to find it on my app here. Yeah, Dern -105, Torres -115 is what William Hill has. So yeah, it's pretty much a coin flip.
Yeah, man. I tend to agree with that. But what sort of freaks me out about this fight is I feel like there is room for, in my opinion, this to be another prospect fight for Mackenzie Dern. I feel like if she ends up going out there and doing those same exact things like you mentioned, don't get me wrong, I'm loving the pressure striking game she's developing under why did I just completely blank on that Ruka head coach's name? I love him. How am I not? Michael Bisping's trainer. What is his name?
I can't remember.
Anyway, yeah, Perillo. There we go.
There you
Jason
go.
Perillo.
There you go.
I love the game she's developing there. I feel like long term, I'm really excited to see where she goes because I feel like there's not many people on this planet that possess the skills that she has on the ground, let alone women. But at the same time, I feel like on the feet, it's just sorry, I'm all over myself here, but I'm just very excited about this one. I feel like the same prospects as far as a potential Dern submission, you can give the exact same weight to a potential Tisha Torres knockout. Like I feel like the power on the feet is considerable, even though obviously Tisha Torres tends to be more of a decision fighter. But I just feel like with the sort of vulnerabilities that Mackenzie Dern has shown, that's why I tend to feel like both of those are sort of equal shots, in my opinion, of those things happening. But when I consider those things and the fact that Tisha Torres is someone who tends to go decision and tend to do well in those spots, I just feel like she should be a favorite. Like I don't understand why the line is that close or potentially even flipping the other way. So I think I'm going to end up with a potential bet here on Tisha Torres, but it's going to be sweaty. It's going to be scary. But that's my play here.
Yeah, this is one of those fights. I agree that it should be lined closely. I've kind of been going back and forth on this, and I try to never get too deep into like putting all my eggs in the idea that a breakdown of a fight is completely binary. But I do think that this fight pretty much comes down to if Mackenzie Dern can take Tisha Torres down and keep her down for decent spells of time, she wins this fight. If she can't, she doesn't. I do think that that's pretty likely the breakdown here. One thing that does concern me was that Tisha Torres got out grappled by Angela Hill in spots in that fight. And that does scare me a little bit. But yeah, I think, looking at Dern's last fight against Marina Rodriguez, like I said, that she it's almost like she goes for a takedown once, and then if she doesn't get it, she decides to box for the rest of the round. And then we see later in that fight, if I remember correctly, I think the last so that was a 5-rounder. Yeah, the last 2 rounds, she boxed for the whole round and then went for a takedown like in the last 30 seconds or last 60 seconds or something. Like she literally didn't even try for a takedown until almost the end of the round. And at that point, it's too little too late, kind of, even if she does get it, and so it's, and we've got a 3-rounder here. She's going to need to look to more completely push the wrestling here and push the grappling. If she does kind of go into it with that same idea that she's just I'll just hang out and box and go for a takedown late in the round, I don't think that's gonna work out well for her here. But yeah, I think it really does just come down to whether you believe Dern can or cannot get those takedowns and keep Torres down. And I'm a little bit undecided on how I feel about whether that's going to happen or not. But yeah, I'm going to make Torres my pick. It's not super confident. This is a fight where you could maybe even look to bet it live. Kind of, it's one of those where I feel like I don't know what the dynamic's going to look like between the two of them. But once a decent portion of round 1 has played out, and I feel like I've gotten a sense for that, I might feel a little more comfortable putting something on it once I see, is she able to get those takedowns, and if so, is she able to keep her down, and that kind of thing. That'll kind of inform my decision, I think.
I agree with almost all of that. Like really spot on stuff. I just want to say, I feel like call me crazy for this. I just feel like long term, when it comes to Tisha Torres, like I feel like we still haven't seen her best performance yet in the UFC, and she's been around for so long that just seems like a strange thing to say. But that is 100% the case for Mackenzie Dern as well. Like obviously we've seen her do 100 like amazing things already, but at the same time we've also seen those growing pains in her game. So I just, man, fascinated with how this one could potentially play out as well, because there's just so many different variables in this one. But
one thing
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to move on. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is neither here nor there kind of, but just one thing that I've definitely noticed about Dern that just kind of speaks to how much she's grown as a fighter and how serious she's taking this is just how much her physique has changed since she's come into the UFC. I mean, she's a lot more kind of bricked up and ripped now than she used to be. I mean, her physique has changed a lot. You know, she kind of went from looking like a, you know, obviously fit woman to looking like a professional fighter, you know, like, so clearly she's taking her strength and conditioning seriously and really taking the game seriously.
That's a really great shout. And I think something that she credited to that growth in her career was her becoming a mother, which in my opinion is even more fascinating because you would think that would be harder to do after dealing with the craziest life event I cannot even fathom. So yeah, really cool stuff. And I think, like you said, like you can't count out the potential and the things that she's been doing and the way you can see that she's been working on her game. At the same time, I just feel like the more proven product is Tisha, which is why we're both leaning that way. But exciting stuff. I agree. Live betting is the way to go on this one. I'm gonna shut the hell up for the next 3 fights because I'm fascinated by each of these for different reasons, and I just really want to hear your takes first and then give my thoughts. But Khamzat Chimaev coming up against Gilbert Burns, dude. What the fuck? These next 3 fights are awesome. Please tell me what you think about this matchup.
You know, this is one of those I was just mentioning earlier about how, like, so often I sort of have a read or have an opinion on a fight and I allow myself to be completely talked off of it because of everyone else's thoughts. I feel like I am the only person in the world who thinks Khamzat being minus 600 or whatever he is here is insane. Khamzat is, yes, he's a very, very good fighter. He might be a great fighter. I don't think we know that yet. Obviously, you know, he's had 4 UFC fights. He's been incredibly dominant in all 4 of them. But that's the thing. We know what he looks like when he's dominating. We have no idea what he looks like when he's not. And I'm really surprised that people are as confident in him in this fight as they are. And there are lots of other situations that you can point to, not exactly like this, but we've seen it happen lots of times where a fighter comes in and is incredibly dominant. Johnny Walker is an example. It was a different kind of dominance, but I mean, Johnny Walker came in and was blowing people out of there in just a few seconds, and people were really high on him. You know, we've seen that happen with a number of different fighters, but usually these were situations where the person was getting the big quick KO, which I'll admit is different from Chimaev, who has not only had the one quick KO but shows that incredible grappling dominance. That is a different kind of dominance. I definitely concede that, but I think this is a situation where, you know, we like I said, we know what Khamzat looks like when he's dominating, but we don't know what he looks like on his back. We don't know what he looks like in difficult decisions. We don't know if we don't know what his heart looks like when things aren't going his way. We've seen him as a hammer. We have not seen him as a nail. Do I think there's a chance that Khamzat comes out here and does the same thing to Gilbert Burns as he's done to everyone else? Sure. That there is a chance that happens. I think Khamzat is, in addition to how skilled he obviously is, I think that he's one of those guys who probably has freakish strength. I think he's probably one of those guys who just has that crazy farm boy strength. You know what I mean? Like, and so and obviously Gilbert Burns is a strong guy as well, but that's Khamzat is quite a bit bigger. I think he's like 4 inches taller. So I certainly do think that Khamzat should be favored here, but he's coming in here against, you know, one of the best welterweights in the world and a guy who, while competing at the highest elite level in the UFC, still competes in sport jiu-jitsu against the best in the world and still beats them. You know, I mean, a guy who is just one of the most incredible welterweights in the world. And I just think, you know, at this point, I think Gilbert Burns is at he's at odds where he's like 16%, 18% implied or something like that. And I think that's kind of crazy. I haven't sprinkled anything on Gilbert Burns here. I'm waiting to see if the line gets even better, because I feel like people are going to put Hamzat in their parlays, and maybe we're going to get an even better line on Burns. As for a pick, certainly I'm picking Hamzat to win here. But as for a bet, I wouldn't touch it. And I think, to me, like, at least a little sprinkle on Burns, especially what I think he's at, like plus 450 or something like that, which is already awesome. But if he's going to get even up to like plus 500, plus 600, something like that, as people throw Hamzat into their parlays, like, that is like a no-brainer sprinkle, in my opinion. Just given from what we know about Gilbert Burns and what we don't know about Hamzat so far.
Great shouts, and you're not the only one. I think MMA Wiz last week mentioned that he was willing to sound the upset alarms and go with Gilbert Burns in this one. Dude, I'm fascinated by this fight because I agree with you. I feel like the line is way too big, but at the same time, I can't justify it being smaller either. Like, I feel like
I know what you mean.
It's such a weird spot.
To say, but yeah,
it's such a weird spot. But what sort of really freaks me out here. So let me go on a little tangent, and then you'll see where I'm headed with this one. But I saw some of Khamzat's Brave CF fights, and I think one that I would represent, sort of put out there that you should check out as well, is this fight against Ikram Aliaskarov. Now, that's a tough name to say, but that's a guy who's a Sambo world champion who came into MMA and has been doing extremely well after their fight, 4 wins in a row. And he's, I believe, with Eagle FC now. So even more accessible for the fans to watch his fights. I think he's an amazing fighter. And in that fight, what we saw was very interesting. We saw in the first round, Hamzat was very sort of determined to try to get takedowns, and they were tit for tat in the grappling. He couldn't get takedowns. He was getting his takedown stuffed. And then in the second round, he ends up landing a beautiful uppercut that just sparks Ikram dead. And what freaked me out about that fight was there was some frustration there. Like, you saw, it was almost a moment like, damn, like, I can't do what I usually can do here. And in the second round, it felt like that was gone. Like, it felt like he was like, all right, well, plan B is here now, and this is what we're going to do. And I don't picture in this matchup, which is why I think that fight is so relevant. I don't picture him coming out and wrestling Gilbert Burns at all early, or at all even, which is a scary thing to think about when you consider how dominant his grappling has been. I feel like he has very substantial power on the feet. And I think it really relies on his ability to pressure, because he's not afraid to be taken down. He has good shot defense as well. And you saw that in that Ikram fight too. Please check that out. Really high level stuff.
I will.
For a fight outside of the UFC. But man, like, I feel like this matchup with Gilbert Burns specifically, I feel like it's really going to come down to, in practice, who the hell is going to be able to pressure effectively. Like, I feel like that's ultimately what it comes down to, which makes for such an exciting fight. I don't picture Chimaev coming out and then going on the back foot and just trying to outbox. Like, that'll be even more insane. And if he's able to pull that off, I'll be like, I'm never betting against this guy again. But I agree with you. I think long term, it doesn't make sense for Hamzat to try and grapple here. And if he does do that, another potential outcome here, then I will never fade him again, which is a scary thing to consider. I feel like his potential is really through the roof, and a lot of people get wrapped up in the hype because obviously the UFC is clearly pushing him hard. But at the same time, I just feel like he's a very well-grounded dude, besides all the I'm here to kill everybody shit, which you love to see at the same time. I think he's a real grounded dude, and I think he really sort of takes this shit seriously as far as identifying the parts of his game and the ways he needs to improve them. Which, when you have someone with all those different things and that stick-to-itiveness, you got a special fighter on your hands. So obviously, it's very clear I'm creaming over Hamzat over here. But at the same time, I feel like if Burns is able to pressure early and put some doubt in Hamzat, I feel like things can easily unravel. So I agree with you, man. Like, there's a lot of room for the lines to look silly here in both directions. I'm going to stick with my Hamzat Chimaev pick just because I feel like he's going to be able to pressure Burns, because like that first round, in my opinion, do not go anywhere. Do not step away from the TV. Like, I think out of all the fights on this card, this is going to be the most fascinating first round, because we're really going to see how this one is going to play out and how each fighter is going to be forced to approach it in round two if it gets there. I am so pumped for this fight, but I'm also very scared for Gilbert Burns, because I think there's been multiple examples in his career. The Dan Hooker fight, even the Kamaru Usman fight comes to mind, where he has been pressured effectively and sort of wilts late and ends up getting finished. Now, at the same time, I agree. I don't like just assuming that Gilbert Burns is going to lose, because he's proven me wrong in a lot of those spots. In my opinion, he fits into that same Kelvin Gastelum mold, where all his skills obviously are there and they scream out at you, but frame wise, you expect him to not be able to live up to that at this bigger weight class, especially. And he's just been proving people wrong over and over again. So, man, so much to chew on with this fight. I'm going Khamzat here, and I just can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying about round one. Like when this fight starts, the excitement is going to be palpable. Like the minute the bell rings here, like I'm going to be freaking out, I feel like. And like and it could, round one could very easily be like, there are a lot, the majority, I think, of MMA fans are already considering Khamzat to be great, to be an absolutely like transcendent fighter. And he probably will be. And we're gonna find out pretty quickly, I feel like. Like even if the fight's not over in round one, I feel like we're gonna find out pretty quickly whether he is what a lot of people already believe that he is, I guess, if that makes sense. Or I'm gonna find out, because I'm one of the people who's still like it, and it's not that I don't think he's great or won't be. I just think we still don't know. And maybe I'm a little bit of a doubting Thomas there, but and he's probably going to prove me wrong. And I'm definitely not picking Burns. Khamzat is definitely my pick, but man, that number just seems a little disrespectful. And I feel like you got to put a little something on Burns there.
I feel you on that. And I just want to say, top 5 traps in the UFC on Gilbert Burns. Like, that dude is stacked, bro.
Yeah.
Super random thing to add in there, but I had to. So let's move on. If we're all set, yep. Co-main event, the first of the title fights, and in my opinion, the most exciting of the two. We have Aljamain Sterling. Yes, he gets top billing because he's the champion, coming up against Peter Yan in the rematch. Now, I've talked a little bit about this fight on Twitter, so I think sort of where I'm headed on this one. I'm excited to hear what you got to say. So please grace us, my man.
I feel like, okay, so essentially the way the first fight played out, I feel like was, obviously Sterling was having a lot of success early, just putting on a lot of pace and a lot of pressure and just outpacing Yan. But, Yan is also the kind of fighter who, when he's got 5 rounds to work with, I think he was kind of fine with letting that happen to a degree. He's the kind of fighter who can go ahead and make his reads and let you tire out a little bit and that sort of thing. And he's just such a smart fighter and such a process-based fighter that, I'm going to say some of the same things about Volkanovski. Like, I feel like those guys are both like machines. They're like, there's a fighting computer in their head. And it's like, okay, during this part of the fight, I can hang back and let him win a little bit. And then it's like just constantly computing and like, okay, now we are reaching the part where I need to up my pace and pressure a little bit and start to take over. And it's like, they're just crazy fighting machines, I feel like. And if this fight was, I feel like if this fight was 3 rounds, this is a great example of a fight where being 3 rounds or being 5 rounds, I think could potentially make a huge difference. Because we've seen, in the first fight, Sterling was able to keep up that pace and that pressure long enough that if it were a 3-round fight, Jan would probably have to change the way he's approaching it a little bit. He wouldn't necessarily be able to just kind of hang back and let that happen. And then, or he'd have to pick his moment to take over certainly earlier. But, Sterling's a guy who, in order to win minutes here, he needs to really put the pedal down and use that pace and pressure, which he's able to do well, but he's not able to do it for all 25 minutes. And so, I mean, unless he's somehow able to find a finish early or, within the first 3 rounds, which is really unlikely, I don't see the fight playing out much, besides the knee. I don't see the fight playing out much differently from the first time. I think we'll see Aljamain come out with that pace and that pressure. And, he may adjust his game plan a little bit here because of how it went the first time, but also, he probably feels like it went pretty well the first time, I mean, he did well, in the fight. Well, he won, but yeah, anyway, but, yeah, I think we might kind of just see more of the same here with Aljamain doing well early, but he's not able to keep that pace and that pressure up, and Jan kind of picking his moment to just sort of slowly start to do his thing and take over. And I feel like it probably goes to decision, but I don't have anything on this fight now, but I would potentially look to sprinkle Peter Yan in rounds 4 and round 4 and round 5, maybe a little bit. I haven't done that yet, but that's something I'm going to be taking a look at. But those are kind of my overall thoughts on the fight, I guess.
Awesome, man. I have a question for you before I jump into my analysis. So when you do round sprinkles like that, how do you justify it, like math wise? And what would be a win there for you? Because every time I've considered doing it, once I actually go to start adding in the units, I'm like, do I really want to do this right now? Like, is this the way to go?
I literally, when I do those, I literally put usually 0.2 units. So it's, and like, actually when I first started tracking, my props were, the line on my props was below the 0 for a while. I was down on props, but the nice thing is you only need to hit 1 every once in a while and you bump back up again because they pay so well. But yeah, I don't necessarily treat them the same way as a money line as far as figuring out like a percentage of likelihood, because I feel like that's just getting too specific to, like, I look at this, plus 2,200, that's X percentage, and I feel like I don't quite get that deep into it, but I just kind of look at it like, okay, could I potentially see this fighter fading late in the fight and this fighter finishing? Like, if I do 0.2 units on round 4 and 0.2 units on round 5, I'm less than a half a unit in, and it almost ends up being more of a fun thing than anything. But I do hit them every once in a while. I hit them often enough that I am slightly up on props, but not much. But if I go a couple more events without hitting one, I'll probably be down a little bit.
I feel you on that 100%. And yeah, I agree. I think if I'm taking shots on that, I would never go above a unit. But math wise, I'm always trying to see, like, what would be my return and how could I make it work so that even if one of them hits and obviously the other one won't, because that's impossible, but I'm still coming away great here, and obviously the lines will probably justify that, so I'll definitely be taking a look at that too. I got a random side story here, so bear with me and then I'll go into my analysis here. The very first UFC fight that I went to live was the Machida versus Luke Rockhold card in New Jersey. If you look back at it now, one of the more stacked cards, really, one of the more stacked fight night cards you could get, and on that undercard was the Aljamain Sterling Takeo Mizugaki fight. Now, I'll be very frank about this. I was still a UFC noob at this point, and I didn't realize that sometimes places just don't have parking. So I was not in the arena when that fight happened, but I was watching it as I was sort of perusing around. And I came away from that moment being like, man, I wish I was there, because I think this guy has championship level potential. Just from seeing that finish against Takeo Mizugaki, it was one of those, what did I just watch moments that really continued to push me towards watching the sport, which obviously just super exciting stuff and has sort of made me a little bit biased towards Aljamain Sterling. I just wanted to get that off the record immediately. But when I look at this fight, the first matchup specifically, I agree with everything you said. I thought watching it live, this is just what Peter Yan does. So I didn't put too much stock into the fact that Aljamain Sterling really took that first round, and maybe you can even argue the second, just based off of output. But I didn't put too much stock in that because I'm like, I know this is what Peter Yan does anyway. So he's getting his reads, and it's going to come to bear later on. And boy, did it. I mean, just the foot sweeps and the clinch control, that shocked me. Like I that really opened my eyes to the level of fighter that Peter Yan is because of how much I rate Sterling. And then I feel like obviously with the outcome, everything gets thrown out the window because I was talking shit and saying, Peter Yan's the rightful champ because obviously I'm a big Risen fan. So I'm like, this is bullshit. Like there's no way that he really reacted that way. But once again, as someone that has never been in a fight, I cannot even make that claim. But just watching it, I was like, I've seen people take knees and continue. This is bullshit. And that was my immediate read. But now the further I get away from it, I feel like you can kind of throw that whole fight out the window. And I know that sounds crazy. But considering the fact that Aljamain Sterling had that very significant neck injury, I think that played into his strategy here 100%. On top of the fact that once things shifted as far as the tide, like there's no reason to think coming into the second fight with the way those last last 2 rounds played out for Peter Yan, there's no reason to think that Sterling wins this fight. But at the same time, when you consider all those other factors, my mouth starts to water a little bit here. And I'm going to be very honest. I agree with a lot of the things you said. I think Peter Yan should be considered much higher on the pound for pound list and hasn't gotten his due because of the way that fight played out and how long this saga has taken to come to an end. I think Corey Sandhagen is one of the best fighters in the world as well. And it just so happens that they're all in that same weight class. So I really highly rate both of these guys. I just want to get that off as well, not just Aljamain Sterling. But I think the first round in particular is such a dangerous round for Peter Yan here because I didn't expect Aljamain Sterling to be able to do anything remotely close to what he did to Corey Sandhagen. Now, these are two different fighters, 100%. And when it comes to sort of clinch control and strength, I think Yan showed, even in their matchup, that he has a lot more to offer there as far as just physical strength and sort of being able to stop someone from moving you around. But at the same time, I feel like I could see a situation here where Aljamain Sterling is 100% ready to go and completely, obviously, devoid of any of those health issues and is able to really put it on him, not just in the striking, but also in the grappling early. And that's a scary spot to be in. Regardless of if you're someone like Peter Yan. I think Aljamain Sterling is that good. Now, will I be betting on submission on Aljamain Sterling? Hell no, because I agree with you. I think even if Peter Yan ends up in a tough spot, I feel like he's going to be able to work his way out of that. Now, the question ends up being, how long can Aljamain Sterling keep that up? Because at this point, there's no logical reason to think it could go longer than 2 rounds as far as that output. But at the same time, it's just such a fascinating fight for that because of all the injury issues on top of the way, all these different variables. I'm really excited about this one. I tend to feel like if Aljamain Sterling finds a way to get a submission here, like you can now consider him in that pound for pound slot. And I think they're going to really push for that third fight. And I hate that for him because if you get a win over this guy, like you don't want to fight him again. I don't care. Like you don't want that to happen. I'm really excited for this one and for Aljo's stake, just because obviously I've been very invested in his career. I really hope that he gets to show his real overall skills in this fight and we get the fight that we sort of deserve out of this one. But at the same time, I'm talking myself out of it because I picked Aljamain Sterling last week. I think I'm going to have to go with Peter Yan. I think that long term and just proven fight acumen, you gotta lean towards Peter Yan in this one.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, man. Long-winded, but we get there, baby.
Oh, I love it, man. You made some really great points there.
So this main event, now don't get me wrong. I hear a lot of people are like bummed out about this fight because Korean Zombie doesn't deserve it. At the same time, I just am excited to see Alexander Volkanovski do his thing. I think he's one of the best fighters in the world, if not the best fighter in the world. That's how highly I rate him. And that also has a lot to do with Max Holloway. I feel like both of those guys are leaps and bounds ahead of that division. And I think the only reason I tended to lean towards Holloway in two of those fights is because I am super biased. And I will admit that. So everything that Alexander Volkanovski has shown in his career up to this point has been nothing but impressive. I mean, even going back to the Darren Elkins fight, the Chad Mendes fight, those are both moments where I'm watching and I'm like, this dude is the real fucking deal. And that was even before he became champ. So Bald Volkanovski is a scary character. As someone who has no lettuce up there, I will tell you, I am proud to have him on Team Bald Man. I'm 100% going to be picking Volkanovski here. I think you should consider him as a parlay leg. I think if the Korean Zombie is able to get this fight finished somehow, I would imagine it would be a knockout and not a submission, just from what we saw in that Brian Ortega fight. Because man, I just think offensively and defensively, there's not a. This is something that we were talking about on the Sideline Guys this week, where we were trying to think of certain players in the NBA that offensively and defensively, both at the same time, you can consider as the best out of everyone. I feel like Alexander Volkanovski is that guy in all weight classes. And that's why I tend to feel like he should be an even bigger favorite in this matchup. But I will say, if Korean Zombie ends up finding a way to figure this one out and win this fight, all-time feel-good moment. Like, let's just make that clear. All-time feel-good moment. But you have to go with Alexander Volkanovski here.
Yeah, I agree. This is another one of those fights that kind of the same thing I said earlier, that you're looking at one fighter who, in order to win, likely needs to catch lightning in a bottle in one moment. And if that doesn't happen, is just going to get beat by the more consistent process over 25 minutes. And you know, Volkanovski's another one of those guys who's just kind of like a machine. He makes his reads, he figures out his approach, and then he just stays really, really consistent. I think like one of the best things about his game, I mean, really, his striking game is like pretty bread and butter, really. As far as the actual strikes that he uses, as far as his like shot selection, he keeps it fairly simple. He's just so good at it. He makes those reads. He knows what distance to be at. He knows when to slip. He knows when to come back. He just he figures out what you're working with pretty quickly. And then the computer just lights up, and then it's like he just knows what to do. And it's like, what do you do with that, you know? And yeah, I really do think Korean Zombie is dependent upon finding either a knockout or a submission here. And like you said, the submission, like, I mean, we saw Volkanovski get put into very harrowing situations against one of the best in the game when it comes to that kind of thing, as far as just being able to violently jump on a submission and grab it, and he was able to survive and get out of those situations. So it's tough to see Korean Zombie putting him in a situation like that he's not going to be able to get out of. It's also tough to see him finding that knockout. It's not impossible, but I think, it's quite unlikely, as the odds would suggest. But yeah, it's tough not to see Volkanovski just doing Volkanovski things here, and just making those reads, finding that process, and just sticking to it. And like I said, that's one of his greatest strengths, is just that consistency, where he finds that process. He doesn't feel the need to go outside of that. Sometimes fighters, I feel like they make a mistake by trying to prove something, or trying to make a statement, and just the way Volkanovski fights is a statement in and of itself, that he just stays with that consistency, and he'll just he'll find what works, and he'll just keep doing it. And I think that's awesome, and it obviously works for him, and I think it's probably going to work for him again here.
Great shouts, man. Great shouts. I'm so excited for this card, because even though I feel like for the most part, I mean, we only picked two different outcomes on this entire card, which is hard to do,
Yeah.
especially with the way I pick fights. Let me make that clear. But I just feel like there's no way it plays out that way. Like, I feel like there's somewhere along the lines here, we're going to get a crazy upset that's going to have our jaws drop. And I'm just hoping for, I think it was UFC 199, but a sort of moment like that where Misha Tate versus Holly Holm, she pulls off this insane rear naked choke, and then that leads into Conor McGregor getting insanely rear naked choked by Nate Diaz. Like I would be blown away if some shit like that happens at any point of this card, because I just feel like there's so many spots here where everything is sort of pointing to one fighter, and that's why the fights are made, god damn it, so that we find out really how these things are going to play out in on that night. I'm so excited for this card, man. I just wanted to say, I know we're still a ways away from it, so more than likely there's going to be a little bit of change to the lineup. But at the same time, I would just love for you to give us whatever you have locked in at the moment, which I would admit probably isn't a lot. And I would just say for the rest of the week, just keep your eyes peeled on Erik Betts Fights page just to see where he's leaning on these things, because I feel like there's so many opportunities here, not only to make money, but to find ourselves with our jaws dropped on the goddamn floor. So I'm so excited for this fight card.
Yeah, man, great points. Like you were saying, as far as it's still being, more than a week off, I can't wait to see what matchups we actually get on that night, because they're not going to be the ones we just broke down here. Not all of them, most likely. But yeah, this has been, there were a lot of fights here where I said, I don't really have a confident read. I don't feel like I'm picking a confident winner. From a betting perspective, I have not found much that I liked here. I've had a really hard time with this card so far. There's the books that I use, the props haven't dropped yet, or I haven't looked yet just today. I don't think so. Maybe they have, but there wasn't props last time I looked, so there's definitely going to be some props that I'm going to be looking at. But I think as far as what I've got for bets locked in right now, I parlayed Jan and Imavov, I think, and then Imavov fell off. Let me pull it up and look. I can't remember exactly what I did. I've only got, I think, 2 bets locked in right now, which, that's fine. So like, I'm actually trying to kind of
wait.
Like I said, I'm still figuring out my style. Like I'm kind of doing different things, and I'm actually trying to kind of like just tighten it up a little bit and be like, hey, if you only have 1 or 2 bets on a card, just chill. That's okay. You don't need to go throwing a bunch more things in there. But I ended up with, I had parlayed Ian Gary with Imavov, I think, and then so I ended up with a 2-unit bet straight up on Ian Gary at -270. And then I've got, man, I can't remember what this was. I had a parlay with Peter Yan. It's still listed under parlays, so I know it was a parlay, but it's just Peter Yan now. And I got him at -440, and I've got 1 unit on that. So kind of weird so far. That's all I've got at the moment. But I do still have a little bit more tape I want to do. I do still, I always also have the process of, I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and sometimes I let myself get talked into bets I shouldn't. Sometimes I let myself get talked out of bets I shouldn't. But that's definitely part of my process. So some cappers say not to do that, but I was a long time listener of a bunch of MMA betting podcasts before I actually started doing this myself. So I'm a fanboy first and foremost. So I got my podcasts I got to listen to, and we'll see if any other sharp guys out there talk me onto anything. But for now, I don't have much.
Exciting stuff here, man. I have a couple of random offset questions that I just wanted to ask you that aren't really necessarily have to do with this card necessarily, but there's tie-ins, I promise. The first one I wanted to ask you is, like, in both of these title fights, if an upset is able to be pulled off, like, is that on the sort of like short list of the biggest upsets in title history, like, period, for both of these fights? I feel like even in the Aljamain Sterling fight, like, I just think personally that it just makes so much sense that both the champs are retaining here, that if something else happens, my mind is going to be blown.
Yeah, like, I mean, mathematically, I don't think, just looking at the actual numbers, I don't think, they're not up there with like Juliana Pena beating Amanda Nunes, or like Holly Holm beating Ronda Rousey. Numerically, there are definitely bigger upsets. But yeah, like either, and of course, with how the first Aljamain Yan fight did play out pretty closely, at least for a lot of it. Like but at the same time, look at the way the fight is lined. You know, obviously, even though that fight did play out closely for a lot of it, people clearly are not giving Aljamain much of a chance here. So yeah, like, but at the same time, you know, you always look at using Cody Saftik as an example, the way he puts together his big PRP, his like full card parlay. He's always like, you got to pick a couple underdogs. You have to put a couple underdogs in there every time, because very rarely do all the favorites win. So you got to just mathematically, it makes sense to throw a couple underdogs in there. So like, yeah, some underdogs are always going to win. So like, if we look at those top three fights, Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie, Jan versus Sterling, and Hamzat versus Burns, I think those three favorites, I think a lot of people are going to be parlaying those three up. And man, one of those favorites is going to lose, dude. I don't know which one, but you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like, I don't know, that's just the way it plays out a lot of the time. I'm not outright picking any of those massive favorites in those top three fights to lose, but God, I feel like one of them's gonna. I don't know which one, but that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, man, that's such a great shout, and might as well go down this path because you said it. Gun to your head, what's your upset pick here? I would say, because I already went down the lines, I think it's Aljamain Sterling. I think that's the closest of the three. Even I think the lines reflect that as well. But what would be yours?
Honestly, if I'm being really logical, that's probably my pick too, but we're going to have some fun with it. Gilbert Burns, homie. Gilbert Burns going to do it.
Exciting.
I don't necessarily believe that, but I like to say it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And now finally, I think this is very important. I just want to get your take on this. And I think this is something I'm going to just start asking everyone on the show, because I think it's worth getting some data out there on this question. This is going to be entirely out of left field. So I'll give you my list so that you have some time to think of yours. Top three divisions in the UFC. And I'll let you give a sort of fourth runner up, just so that you don't feel too bad about leaving some divisions out here. I'm going to say, for me, it's men's bantamweight number one any day of the week. I don't care who you're asking. That's it for me. And then I would say I go for number two, I go featherweight, men's featherweight as well. So highly represented in this card. And then for number three, I think I have to say lightweight. But I want to say welterweight. I just feel like right now there's a lot more action to be had at lightweight, and a lot more sort of moving pieces in the division than there is in welterweight. But I would say that's sort of my top four right there in that order, sort of bantamweight, featherweight, then lightweight, and then going to 170 as my runner-up pick.
This is a really tough question for me for a number of reasons. One of them being that, like, this is the kind of thing where I would literally have to pull up the rosters of each of them and kind of look through it to really like give you a solid answer. I'd have to be like, but I think the way is, if we're looking at like how skilled are the fighters, you know, in which weight divisions are the fighters who are simply the best fighters, I think you're exactly right. Like it's almost like you're gonna start at the lightest and work your way up. Although, you know, I mean, 125 isn't super deep at the moment, of course, but yeah, like you went bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight. I think that makes perfect sense, because the most well-rounded fighters that we see with the best cardio, who are just the most skilled, we see them at those lower weight divisions. But the funny thing is, for me personally, I have always been a huge fan of the larger fighters. Always have been. I'm a huge fan of heavyweight MMA, which I know is hilarious because most people kind of hate heavyweight fights. At least, you know, it's low-level heavyweight fights. Dude, I even love low-level heavyweight fights. Like when the UFC signs a new heavyweight, or I see something like, okay, like there's a tough season that's doing heavyweights, or like when there's heavyweights on the Contender Series or whatever, that's what gets me excited. Like whenever I hear about a new heavyweight prospect, I go look that dude up. I find pictures of him. I try to find videos of him. I try to learn what he's doing and stuff. And I don't do that with smaller fighters. I do that with heavyweights and light heavyweights. And I've always been that way. And I think the reason I do that, the reason I get excited about that is when you look at weight classes like bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, you're going to have some differences in height, of course. But for the most part, everybody's physiques are kind of the same. When you get to heavyweight, you've got everything from dudes that are 5'11" to dudes that are 6'11". And like, I just get really fascinated by the different sizes, the different body types, the different weights, just seeing like, at heavyweight, you can have a dude in the ring who does not look like an athlete at all. I mean, literally a big fat dude can walk in there and be a fantastic fighter. And I'm just fascinated by that kind of thing. So that's not a very solid answer to your question, I guess. But as far as what I get excited about, I love heavyweight and light heavyweight. I always have. Plus, like, for a long time, when the UFC was coming up, for a long time, light heavyweight was like the flagship division, with Tito and Chuck Liddell, especially when that whole thing was going on. Light heavyweight was kind of like where it's at. And that hasn't really been the case for a long time. Once the UFC, got rid of the WEC and added in the lighter weight classes, the lighter weight classes are kind of where people have paid more attention. But, yeah, I'm a fan of the big boys. That wasn't even really an answer to your question, but that's what I've got for you.
Dude, no, I love it. I was gonna say, I think that speaks just to how long you've been watching the UFC. I feel like that mindset is entirely a sort of the origins of MMA mindset. Like, we want to see what fucking works, and there's all shapes and sizes when you consider that. So I love that answer. That was just perfect. That even though you didn't answer, you didn't give me a list, you gave me the list that matters to you, and that's what's most important.
And I think part of it is also that with the smaller weight classes, since the body types don't vary as much, fighters all run together in my head. I have a lot of trouble remembering who certain fighters are. Like, I hear the name and I'm like, God, I can't even remember what that guy looks like. And I got to like pull him up, and I'm like, because when it's all like dudes who are 5'6" and are like pretty skinny and buff, and like, those guys all look the same to me, if that makes any sense. Whereas at heavyweight, if you say a heavyweight, I'm like, yeah, I know what that dude looks like, because they're different. I don't know if that makes sense, but it does in my brain.
That's so funny, because for me, I feel like I'm the exact opposite.
Really?
I feel like I tend to put heavyweights out of my mind way faster than I do everyone else, just because historically I've been so wrong because of all the factors you mentioned. Like, I love heavyweight MMA as well. And I think a big part of it now, there's no better time to be a fan. I think if you look at that top 10, you could really make a case for 7 guys there as potentially being the champ within the next 2 years. And I don't think there's many divisions that you can say that where there's a clear path. Like in heavyweight, in a lot of ways, things are wide open at all times. Like, if you're able to pull together a certain win streak, you find yourself in the title shot more times than not, just because of the way that division moves. It's one of the more volatile divisions in that way. But at the same time, I just feel like, especially towards the bottom half of that division, it's so hard for me personally to like keep a read on certain fighters and even imagine matchups against other ones. Like, for example, the Ilir Latifi Alexei Oleinik fight. That's a fight where whenever I think of Alexei Oleinik, I'm like, yeah, he's never going to be cracking the top 15. And if I'm not mistaken, he's been top 15 for a big part of his UFC career. So so funny. I feel like our brains are completely on opposite ends of the spectrum on this one.
Well, and I think that's the case with most MMA fans. When I tell people that I love heavyweight MMA, like, I even love sloppy low level heavyweight MMA. Most people are like, oh, that's the like go get a beer or go to the bathroom fight or something. But to the points that you made, I think a lot of it is just simply that if you look at the roster, there's not that many people that are that size in the first place, and not a lot of them that are athletic, and the ones that are athletic go into other sports. And like, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many heavyweights are on the UFC roster, but there's only probably like 35 or 40 or something, right? I don't even know, but there's not a lot. And I think also to your point, the heavyweight and light heavyweight really fluctuate more than other divisions as far as the quality at any given time. Right now, heavyweight is pretty strong. 3 years from now, we might be back to a point where there's like 2 good heavyweights and the division is just struggling and there's just nobody coming up that's exciting. Same thing kind of happens at light heavyweight, whereas at the lower weight classes, I feel like there's anyone in the top 20 could potentially beat each other on any given day, and there's always a bunch of really promising contenders. Even, I mean, you can at bantamweight, you could probably go down to the top 30 top 40, and it's still a bunch of killers, you know, and it's very different at heavyweight and light heavyweight in that regard.
Yes, sir. Great stuff. Great, awesome conversation. I just always love having you on here. So thank you so much again for coming on.
Absolutely.
Please, one more time before we head off, just give everybody your socials again, just so they make sure that they follow you before they wrap up with the show.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm Erik Betts Fights on Twitter. Also, Erik Betts Fights on YouTube, and Erik_Betts_Fights on Instagram. If you're like in your 20s, follow me on Instagram, guide me, send me some messages, tell me what I should do on Instagram. I was born in the 70s. Thank you.
I just love the way you set those things up. You could catch me at Negrong MMA on Instagram, as well as well, I messed that up entirely. You could catch me at Chris Negrong_ on Instagram and Negrong MMA on Twitter. Look forward to multiple more amazing MMA coverage moving forward, as well as, you know, some old school events. I'm excited to get back into that because I feel like that's where this show started. And now that I've been doing these recaps and sort of look forward shows, I feel like this has honestly made me a lot more excited, to do this every week, but to also get back into doing those old school MMA events. So excited to give a look at that. Look out for UFC 14 coming at you guys next week, as I get a little bit of time to do something else other than the UFC grind. So Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. You are the reason why I continue doing this shit. Thank you so much for the support, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the hell this damn thing goes, because I promise you, by the time the UFC 273 card starts, if this entire lineup is still the same, hit me up on Twitter, and I swear to God, I will send you something personally if you give me your address. So if you hear this all the way at the last seconds of this podcast, and there are no changes, hit me up on DM on Twitter.
Love it.
Peace out, you guys. Have a good one.
See you, everybody.